Thank you, Eva Joy. Joining us now to talk more about this ruling is Ron Fein, the legal director for Free Speech for People, which brought the lawsuit in Michigan. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it. So let's get right to it. You said you're disappointed with the ruling by the Michigan Supreme Court in favor of Trump. Explain why and give us briefly your reasoning for why Trump should be removed from the ballot.
Well, thanks for having me on. The reason that Trump is disqualified under the United States Constitution is that the Constitution says that anyone who swore an oath to support the Constitution but then engaged in insurrection against the U.S. Constitution is forever disqualified from any public office unless and until 2/3 of both houses of Congress vote to remove that disqualification. And because Donald Trump incited and then facilitated and goaded on a violent assault on the U.S. Capitol that nearly assassinated the vice president and blocked Congress from certifying electoral votes, and for the first time in our nation's history, prevented the peaceful transfer of power, he engaged in insurrection and he's disqualified under the Constitution. Now, the Michigan Supreme Court issued a setback, but it's a temporary setback because all the Michigan Supreme Court said is that under Michigan state law, we can't bring this challenge until after the primary. So it didn't say that Trump didn't engage in insurrection. All it said is that this challenge needs to be refiled after the primary, and we'll be ready to do that.
And we talk about how this case differs from the one in Colorado, which your group contributed to as well.
That's right. So the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that under Colorado state law, the case could be considered before the primary. And the Colorado court held a 5-day trial. There were about 15 witnesses, about half from each side. Trump had a full opportunity to present his case, and he called witnesses in his favor. And the judge in the trial court ruled that he'd engaged in insurrection, and the Colorado Supreme Court reviewed the full record and agreed that he'd engaged in insurrection, and furthermore that all of his hodgepodge of legal theories to try and get out of that finding didn't hold any water. And so the Colorado Supreme Court's decision stands as a clear marker that Trump is disqualified under the Constitution, and no court has decided otherwise. I want to make that clear, that the Michigan court and others that have ruled that he can stay on at least primary ballots haven't said that he's innocent of insurrection. All they've said is that the case couldn't be brought at that time or in that forum.
Ron, on Tuesday, we interviewed a liberal Yale law professor who said the Supreme Court keeping Trump off the ballot would actually put democracy at more risk. I want to listen to that and get your thoughts on the other side.
If the Supreme Court agrees with Colorado, then it's open to any state to take Trump off the ballot. It could be that Republican-controlled states could then counteract that by trying to take Joe Biden off the ballot. But my bigger fear is mass violence.
In addition to that, defenders of Donald Trump will say this is just an accusation. What you just told us, that Trump incited an insurrection, is just an accusation. He has not been convicted of anything in the January 6th case. What is your response to that line of argument, to the thinking that the voters should decide this next November?
Well, first of all, it's not just an accusation. As I said, there was a 5-day trial in Colorado, and Trump had every opportunity to present witnesses, and he did. So he has, in fact, had a full trial. But secondly, the argument about mass violence is a little rich, given that that's exactly what we saw on January 6th. And the final point I would make is a hypothetical. Let's imagine Barack Obama wanted to run for a 3rd term for office. Now, the Constitution says that he can't because he's already served 2 terms. But I think some of these same commentators who are saying that we shouldn't apply the Constitution to Donald Trump would be quick to leap ahead and say that that the Constitution blocks Obama from office. They wouldn't be saying, let the voters decide, because the Constitution sets limits on who can become president. And one of the most important limits is that someone who engaged in insurrection is disqualified from any public office.
The original intent of this clause in the Constitution was to keep Confederate officials from jumping on the ballot.
Well, that's like saying that the original intent of the Second Amendment relates to muskets. The framers of the 14th Amendment wrote it in a very general way, and if you look at the debates, they actually said this applies to all insurrections, past and future. So the Constitution is written to apply for all time. It's not written to be a temporary document to solve a temporary problem. If they had only wanted to deal with the Confederates, they would have put in a time limit, which they actually considered at one point and decided not to. So the 14th Amendment applies for all time.
And do you see, what path forward do you see this case taking? And do you think the Supreme Court, will take this up? And how do you see this playing out?
We have another challenge pending right now in the Oregon Supreme Court, and we are going to be shortly filing challenges in other states. Each state has its own timetable for when these challenges are filed. In the meantime, the Supreme Court may well take the case. It's hard to know for certain. And the Supreme Court, if it does take the case, it's hard to predict exactly what they would do, but we think that if they look at the plain language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which any of your viewers can look at for themselves, it's easy to find on the internet, and then look at the publicly available evidence against Donald Trump, they will find that the law and the facts say that he is disqualified under that section of the Constitution.
Such huge implications for this case as it winds its way up to the Supreme Court. It could have a huge impact on the 2024 race. Ron Fein from Free Speech for People. Thanks for coming on and explaining your side.
Thank you.
Dan?